That Xfinity picture quality is insane.
The best college and pro games all in one place. This is my fantasy football, watching these games with you.
You ever tried pancakes and guac? You're about to. Yes, let's go! I got a little recipe.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Inquire Live at Gameday Central, sponsored by Xfinity, alongside Jeff McLane. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from Northwest Stadium as we get set for the Eagles' Week 16 matchup against the Washington Commanders with a chance to win the division on the line. Jeff, how you doing today?
I'm great. I don't particularly love coming to this stadium. It's the worst stadium in the entire NFL, and driving in here is typically a nightmare. But I think they're trying to build another stadium, from what I recall. Taxpayer dollars, apparently. I'm sure the people around here are excited about that. Another dump that will produce a horrible football team for years to come. I'm only kidding. I'm just having some fun here.
Well, we love having fun, and if that's not a good preview for what you're about to see on your television screens here between the Eagles and Commanders, I don't know what is, but we'll give you more of a preview in just a moment. Before we get into our show today, everyone, we want you to be a part of it. You can head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day, leave us a question or a comment down in the chat there, or if you're watching over on social media, Twitter, X, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you are watching us, you can leave us a question and we will answer those throughout our show today. So we look forward to hearing from you today. All right, Jeff, let's jump right into it. This Eagles team is flying high going into this game. After a really tough 3-game losing streak, they rebounded in a resounding way last week against the Las Vegas Raiders with a 31-0 blowout victory. Just lots of highs all over the place. You know, Jalen Hurts was almost perfect in the passing game. We saw kind of an uptick in some of those under center plays that we had seen during that really brief stretch coming out of the mini bye earlier in the season when we started to see some flashes for the offense. It seems like they really built on some of those plays this past week against the Raiders. So some good strides there for the offense overall. The run game, we saw this Eagles defense really step it up as well. The unit has really been incredible all season long for the most part, but last week was perhaps their best performance. It was statistically their best performance of the year, holding the Raiders to under 100 yards of offense. It was just a lot of clean football all around, not a lot of penalties, just 3 penalties from the Eagles as a whole, which is their lowest total of the season. Jeff, is this level of complimentary football sustainable for the Eagles going forward for the rest of the regular season and into the playoffs? Or do you expect there to be some more challenges ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I expect there to be more challenges ahead. I don't want to make too much of the Raiders. You know, the Eagles did what they had to do, and in fact, you know, they did what good teams do, which is they blow out bad teams, and that's what they did last week. And you know, the defense, for the most part this season, as you know, as we've seen, has really carried this unit, and they were able to do that again this past week by pitching a shutout. Now, I don't want to take anything away from the offense, but I think the defense played great, the offense played good, and the offense playing good is better than what they have been for a while. I think the most significant takeaway, I think, were able to kind of establish an identity in terms of just running it at will. It didn't even matter how many yards they were not getting in the first half of Saquon Barkley. Now, they could afford to do that because they knew the defense was going to give them the ball back. But that being said, being under center a lot for almost half of the plays, more than they have been all season, and then being able to throw play action off of that, gave the offense, a lot of production, and it allowed Jalen Hurts, I think, to do something that he's become more comfortable with. He completed all 4 of his passes under center off play action for like 68 yards. Previous week, he had 2 completions on 2 passes for 48, something like that number of yards. So it's something that they've done sporadically, and they had success against the Vikings in doing so. They had success against the Giants the following week. And then they tried doing it against the Packers and the Lions, and those defenses were able to take it away a little bit, and then they got away from it. And I'm not quite sure why. It's not a huge part of the offense, but I think it should be going forward. And as you mentioned, you know, being under center, you can't run as many quarterback designed runs. So the shotgun game in the run game is always going to be probably predominantly what they do. But that being said, Barkley running a lot, Jalen picking his spots on designed runs when he can run or not. I think he did it just 5 times this past game, but that was more than he had done it all season and above the average, which was 1.6 in the first 14 games. So this is something that they, if they're going to give themselves a chance to do something in the postseason, especially with the defense, run the ball. I'm not a big, run the ball at any expense type of guy, but I think considering what the Eagles have and the way that they've performed and the struggles that they've had in the passing game with Jalen Hurts when he's been dropping back too much, this is the way they should go.
Well, John over on X would agree with you, Jeff. John says that he would really love to see the running game get back to a high level, execute at a high level. They need the offensive line to dominate. No Lane Johnson for a 5th straight game today, so that's a loss that they're going to have. But Fred Johnson has been pretty solid in his absence. But this is another building block game. I mean, unfortunately for the Eagles, and really, I guess for the viewer, this isn't going to be the greatest test against this Commanders team. They rank last in the league in yards per pass allowed. They're 5th worst in the league in yards per carry allowed. And the defense has undergone a little bit of a transformation earlier in the season with Joe Witt being demoted as defensive coordinator and Dan Quinn stepping over as the defensive play caller and assuming his duties. However, at the end of the day, the unit just really has not gotten much better, and they've had a lot of attrition this year too. Key pass rushers Dietrich Wise and Dorrance Armstrong went down earlier in the year. Veteran cornerback Marshawn Lattimore, even when he was healthy, he's out injured too. But even when he was healthy, it looks like his best years are behind him right now at this point. So they've got an old, aging defense that has had a lot of attrition. There are still some talented players within the defense in Bobby Wagner and Von Miller, but this is not the formidable group that they were this past season. When you look at this Commanders defense as a whole, which areas do you feel like the Eagles could potentially exploit today?
Well, look, they ran for 668 yards against them last year in 3 games, which is remarkable amount of yards on the ground. And, they went out and got Javon Kinlaw and spent a fair amount on him. And it was kind of ridiculed at the time because of, I think they gave him like $45 million guaranteed for a guy who just was, a good player, but not a great player. And someone he's on the other side, not on the other side of 30, but getting close to he's certainly on the other side of 27. And he really honestly hasn't really done much in terms of helping them up front and stopping the run. And as you mentioned, they don't statistically do well in terms of stopping the run. And then you watch the film, and I think Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu are good off-ball linebackers, but both of them probably aren't what they used to be. Certainly Bobby Wagner isn't, and he's a future Hall of Famer. He's still a good run defender when he's getting downhill. He can be exploited in the pass game. I think the same goes for Louvu. As bad as they are defending the run, they're horrendous when it comes to their pass defense. Now, Dan Quinn taking over has marginally improved what they've done, and I thought that they really played hard and really gave an effort a couple weeks ago against the Broncos, and then, of course, just last week against the Giants, not a very good team. But you can attack them beyond in the run game, and I think Quinn, he'll play a lot of single high man. He'll play cover 3, which will have a safety, one safety in the post. So there'll be opportunities to throw the ball downfield. I take A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith against most cornerbacks, but as you mentioned, with Marshawn Lattimore being out, these are not the greatest collection of cornerbacks in the world. But this could also be a Dallas Goedert game. And, build off of what he had done last week and what he's done, intermittently over certain parts of this year, especially against those linebackers. If you can get him matched up against either of those linebackers, Dallas could have a big game.
Well, let's get back to this Eagles run game. They're coming off of one of their best performances of the season last week against the Raiders. Again, one of the worst, not the worst defenses, one of the worst teams for sure, but it's not a terrible defense. And even though they have had some struggles in recent weeks against the run, but the Eagles still racked up 183 yards on the ground. Saquon Barkley, of course, leading the way in that regard with 78 yards and a touchdown on 22 carries. But I think what was most interesting to me about that game was Jalen Hurts' usage, and specifically on design runs. He had 7 carries for 39 yards. Most of those carries were design runs. Just a couple of them were scrambles. And that we've seen this has become more of a trend recently. We've seen Hurts on more and more design runs as this season has progressed. one thing that I'm very curious to see in this game is if he continues on that trend of the designed runs, because we saw toward the end of the game last week that he got banged up on one play, didn't miss any time on one of those design runs. He didn't miss any time. He jumped right back into action, and he said during the week he felt fine, wasn't on the injury report, so he's good to go. However, Jeff, do you think that the Eagles will be a little bit more cautious with him going forward down the stretch here until the playoffs begin, or do you expect this trend of quarterback design runs to continue?
Well, I again, they have to pick their spots. A lot of times it depends upon how they're being defended. On those option plays, if it says if the read is to throw the ball, you're going to throw the ball. And that's kind of been their excuse for not doing it as much with Jalen. But I don't think that's in truth, really. When you have that large of a sample, 14 games, and he's only run 1.6 design runs versus what he's had previously, which is like around, this previous 4 years as a starter in the Sirianni system. I think it's like the average is close to 4. It may not seem like a lot, but that's a marginal decrease, when he doesn't run as much. Now, just a year ago here in Landover, that's where Jalen running the ball was a scramble. He suffered his concussion when Frankie Louvu kind of came in late, and a lot of people thought it was a cheap shot. It wasn't called that way. But he got knocked from the game, and the Eagles went on to lose that game when Kenny Pickett came in. Now Kenny, to his credit, the following week, delivered a win that gave them the division title, and they have the opportunity here to win the division title here for the second straight year, the first time since 2004. Is that right? So it's been quite a while. But in terms of getting back to the subject, Jalen Hurts running this late in the season, I still feel like it's something that they'll lean into a little more. They have to be careful, right? You don't want to lose your quarterback. In 2 of the 3 previous years, beyond just the concussion, he's gotten hurt and missed time because on quarterback runs in Chicago, he got hit when he kept the ball in a zone read and got slammed to the turf and hurt his shoulder. So again, have to be careful. He's got to be smart. He's got to be when to get out of bounds, when to get down, when to slide. And Jalen over his career has been pretty good at that. Does it take a little bit away from how he looks when he's running the ball? Yeah, and I think that's why he doesn't look as fast as he did how many years ago. But how many of us look as fast as we did 5 years ago, right? Especially me.
Don't want to be hypocritical there, Jeff. I appreciate that acknowledgement. You mentioned Kenny Pickett. The Eagles have faced quite a few opposing quarterbacks, or will face some of their former backups in Pickett last week, and now they'll face Marcus Mariota in today's game with Jaden Daniels out for the rest of the season as he's been dealing with various injuries. The Commanders earlier this week decided to shut it down for the rest of the year for Daniels. It's been a disappointing year for the Commanders overall, for the passing game, for the Commanders offense in particular, not only because of Daniels' injuries this season, but he has lacked playmakers for the majority of the year, and Mariota is not going to necessarily have an easier time out there today, simply because he's going to be down some of his one of his top options in the passing game in Zach Ertz, who sustained a season-ending ACL tear a couple of weeks ago. Plus, he's also going to be missing his left tackle out there in Laramie Tunsil as well. That's a big loss there for the Commanders as well. So the thing to circle, though, with Mariota, weapons aside, is what he can do with his legs. He is very good at extending plays and scrambling, design runs, and he's also good at unleashing the ball deep and hitting his receivers for some deep passes. And we saw that this past week in the Commanders' win against the Giants, their first win in over 2 months. And Mariota had a lot of success on deep passes, including a 51-yard touchdown pass to his top target this season and the Commanders' favorite target since he's been a part of the franchise, in Terry McLaurin. What is the key to ensuring Mariota doesn't run all over them in today's game, especially considering the fact that the Eagles have had some struggles this season against some of those more mobile quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think when they've struggled is because guys haven't been disciplined in their rushes and they've been kind of seeking glory and playing kind of as an individual versus containing and staying in your lanes. And Vic Fangio said the same thing earlier this week when he was asked about keeping Mariota in the pocket, not allowing him to escape and pick up yards and scrambling. And then also in terms of the designed quarterback runs and zone reads and the RPOs, again, guys not kind of biting on that fake. We saw it a couple weeks ago at the Chargers with Justin Herbert was able to get a couple runs late in that game on zone read keeps, and they were key to the Chargers scoring, I think, the game tying field goal, and then eventually the field goal that won them the game. So it's going to be, on the obviously the edge defenders primarily in terms of those zone read runs, and the second level linebackers, Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean. And I think it was Dean who kind of got caught on that one by Herbert 2 weeks ago. So that's all part of it. And then I imagine it's some, on third downs, there'll probably be one of the linebackers will probably be spying Mariota to make sure that he doesn't break loose on one of these scrambles. So that's the key. It's definitely something they have to be concerned about. But they have a good run game. They stick to it. Mariota, as you mentioned, he can throw the ball down the field. He likes to throw. I think he's like first in the NFL in terms of like air yards attempt. Now, in terms of success on 20-yard plus plays, the results haven't been there as much. And as you mentioned, with McLaren being out, that's been a big factor. But he'll be there. No Zach Ertz. That's a concern in the middle of the field. But the Eagles have, Cliff Kingsbury is a good offensive coordinator. They do a lot. They have a lot of different plays. They have a lot of different personnel packages. So you have to be ready for all of that. And that'll be, I think, the key for the Eagles defense to just keep things to a minimum, because this offense doesn't go 3 and out a lot. And I think that's because they stay committed to the ground game, and those running backs, they all average more than 4.5 yards a carry.
Well, let's get back to Terry McLaurin. The last time the Eagles faced the Commanders for the first time last season, you think back to that game, and that was Quinyon Mitchell's big coming out party. He really put his name on the map in that game, especially when lined up across from Terry McLaurin. I think he was lined up across from McLaurin. He was covering McLaurin on 20 of his routes in that game, and he did not allow a single target on any of those routes. It was a big game for Mitchell, and the games that ensued between the Eagles and the Commanders were a real treat to watch because of that matchup between Mitchell and McLaurin. I think the big question going into today's game is, how is Mitchell going to be deployed? Is he going to travel with McLaurin, or is he going to stick on the boundary side, which is something that he has been tasked with lately in these last several weeks, in covering and being accountable for the short side of the field with less safety help, and leaving Adoree Jackson on the opposite side. What do you think is going to happen with Mitchell today? Do you think he's going to travel with McLaurin, given the Commanders' lack of weapons otherwise in the passing game, or do you think he'll just stick on the boundary side?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Both, you can make arguments for both. McLaren, and then there's a drop off to, I think, Deebo Samuel is, obviously he has his skill set. When he has the ball, he's tough to bring down. But in terms of getting separation, not that good anymore, not that fast. So there's that argument. And then there's also just like, because they've been doing it so well with Mitchell on the boundary side. It's like, why mess with what's been working? And with Adoree Jackson really kind of playing the way that they imagined when they acquired him this offseason over the last several weeks, you can kind of get away with that a little more. Just keep them on their sides and let them play it out that way. And it doesn't require as much forced man coverage when you don't have a guy following someone. Which would in turn, put Adoree in that situation. I think Dory's the type of guy that you want to have playing more zone, giving a little more space than because he can get beat over the top, as we've seen, or he'll play way too soft, and then they'll get yards on him underneath and whatever. So my guess is they probably stick with the boundary side thing, but I wouldn't be completely surprised if some, there are certain plays where he does follow McLaren. I mean, he's the guy that you got to worry about, and maybe what they'll do if they don't have Quinyon follow him is just bracket him occasionally when especially on passing downs.
Well, we'll see how it pans out. As we mentioned earlier in the show, the Eagles have a chance to win the division with a victory in today's game. I want to take this question over here from John on X. John says, inevitably, the Eagles are going to have to go on the road in the playoffs, whether it's Seattle, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, you name it. How do they balance reps and execution today versus rest and just today and going forward? Do you think the Eagles are at that point yet? Is that a factor in a game like today's? But as the Eagles get closer to the end of the season, especially with Week 18 potentially being a meaningless game, do you think they'll have an opportunity to rest up some of the starters?
Well, I mean, last week, just like week, they had the opportunity to rest guys up for almost an entire quarter when they got ahead of the Raiders, and I think it was needed at the time because they have had short weeks these last 2 weeks. Next week they'll get an additional day because it's a Saturday game followed by a Sunday game. Now they do have to travel. I don't think like their schedule's been really any harder than most other teams around the league. If you look at it, everyone's got their kind of difficult games in terms of the schedule when it comes to that thing. But in terms of, moving forward, yeah, I mean, like there's always that question about that last game. If it doesn't matter in terms of like where you are going to be seated, do you play them or do you rest them? The Eagles have always leaned on, for the most part, resting their players. And my guess is if that last game doesn't mean anything in terms of the seating, that's what we'll see. Maybe you'll see someone like Jalen Carter, who's coming off the injury. Maybe you want to do something, give him some time to get his sea legs back before he gets out there, because we've seen how conditioning has affected him before. I don't think there'll be any reason to force Lane Johnson out there, and I think that's what they're doing right now. They're kind of slow playing his return. I think he's probably technically could play if they really needed him, but at this point, with the NFC East, a victory here, clinching that on the line, and if they do it, then maybe you probably will shut down Lane for the rest of the regular season and wait until the playoffs for him.
That's a good question. You make a good point. When you think back to week 18 last year, that was when Dallas Goedert ended up coming back. And while the rest of the starters played, Goddard actually got at least a couple drives in and got to work his way back in for the playoffs. So we'll see how the Eagles handle those two injured players specifically. For today, Jeff, we've discussed plenty of players that we're intrigued by heading into this matchup. However, if you had to just pick one, who would it be?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Alex Hunt, who's really had a nice little season. The sack numbers aren't, mesmerizing. I think he has 4.5 this year, but he's got 20 quarterback hits. And when you start getting over 20, I think for hits, that's just as good as having like eight sacks or something like that. So, I mean, he's producing. He's really kind of developed into, an edge rusher that has multiple moves, and you have to be concerned about. And he's done more than just like in terms of the edge rush. We've seen him have 2 interceptions, one for he returned for a touchdown. He's gotten better at setting the edge versus the run. And with Laramie Tunsil being out, he should have an opportunity versus his backup Brandon Coleman, who was the starter last year. So the Eagles know him pretty well, but he was so poor last year that they were kind of forced to go out and get Tunsil, and that's why Coleman. He has played some guard earlier this year, and I think he did play a little bit of tackle when Tunsil was out at one point. But that's an opportunity for Alex Hunt and for Nolan Smith, who typically rushes from that side, to do some damage and force Mariota to hold the ball longer or to move out of the pocket, or who knows, maybe even get sacked a few times.
Well, we already mentioned my player pick today, but I just want to reiterate, I will be watching Dallas Goedert in today's game. Had a really strong game this past week against the Raiders, 2 touchdowns, nearly had 3, dropped one right in the red zone. He's been the Eagles' most popular target in the red zone too. It was interesting. He spoke earlier this week about the shift in philosophy that the Eagles have had when they are down there in the red zone, and it's gone from really a run attack or a run first approach in that area of the field to a pass first approach, and he's been the beneficiary of that. He's got 8 touchdowns in the red zone this year. I think 9 touchdowns overall. He's had 3 multi-game touchdowns, and given the fact that some of these Commanders linebackers and Bobby Wagner, Frankie Louvu have had a hard time covering down the field, and I think the Commanders have given up the 4th most receiving yards to tight ends this season. I think Goddard could be in for another big day, so he is my player to watch in this game. All right, Jeff. Crystal ball time. You did a great job last week in your prediction
for the first time in a long time. Yeah,
congratulations. I had it being a pretty narrow game, a pretty close game. It ultimately was not a close game whatsoever. You predicted it to be more of a blowout. What is your prediction for today's game against the Commanders?
Yeah, so I have the Eagles winning. The Commanders aren't good. Their defense is lacking. They've been battered. And don't have, key guys at key spots. So, that certainly allows the Eagles offense, hopefully, to build some momentum off the past week. I'm not completely bought in because I think the Raiders are pretty bad. And, as you mentioned, their defense isn't that bad, but overall they're a pretty bad team. And I think that hurts their defense. And when you look at things step back and look at it. So there's all that's you factor into when you're looking at the teams. But that being said, this is a division game. They have to go on the road. I know there'll be a lot of Eagles fans here, so it may feel like the link away from home. But Mariota is a solid backup quarterback, and really as bad as Washington has played all this year, it's not it's not like I think Jaden Daniels can get off the hook. I don't think he played particularly well when he was gone. So in some ways, Mariota has been better. And then getting McLaren back and not having Ertz, certainly that's something to be concerned about. But this is an offense that's good, and I think the Eagles are going to have their issues and keeping them out of the end zone as well as the Eagles defense has played. So I see a high scoring game, probably higher than maybe people might think, and I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk. Actually, I'm looking here now. You actually have a closer score than I do, so maybe I'm picking a blowout. But I have the Eagles winning 30-20.
I have a similar score to you, 28-20. So yeah, you're right. You've got a couple more points there for the Eagles. John over on X says 31-14. So quite the blowout for John by most people's standards. But yeah, I guess a little bit closer of a game. I don't know how confident I feel in that. But ultimately, I feel similarly as you do. That being said, after watching last week's game between the Commanders and the Giants, the Commanders tried to lose that game. Like they were up over the Giants like 2 scores, and they just at the end of the game they fumbled the ball away twice and gave some points up to the Giants. And it was really kind of for not the first time, but one of the few times this season where it was the Commanders defense bailing out the Commanders offense just because of how many mistakes that they've made. So this game often ends up being a battle in who can make the fewest mistakes. Commanders made a lot of mistakes in that game. The Eagles are cleaning up their play. They've had a lot of struggles with penalties this season, a lot of self-inflicted wounds. They just can't. I think that they are their own worst enemy at times this season, and that is going to be something to watch going into the playoffs. Are they giving themselves a chance against some of these playoff caliber teams, or are they getting in their own way? So in order to make this a worthwhile test, they need to prove that they're not going to beat themselves in a game like this against a lesser opponent. But I still have the confidence that they can do that, even if it'll be a closer game than it was this past week. Hard to get much bigger of a blowout than it was last week, but I've got the Eagles, as I mentioned, 28-20, and we'll see how they fare down this last stretch of the season. This upcoming game against the Buffalo Bills, I think that'll be a more interesting game. Unfortunately, the NFL tried to schedule this matchup between the Eagles and the Commanders, both of them, backload them into the schedule, thinking that both teams would have playoff implications on the line, a chance to win the division, a battle to the very end. And alas, that was not how it panned out this season. It's kind of a bummer. Honestly, I think they should have opened the season Eagles Commanders at home with the Eagles lifting their Super Bowl banner. Alas, no one asked me for my opinion when they made the schedule. So instead, the Eagles got the Cowboys. But alas, perhaps next year it'll be more competitive between the two teams, or the Commanders will continue to struggle depending on how things go. But anyway, that is going to do it for us, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us once again at Inquire Live at Gameday Central, sponsored by Xfinity. As always, if you haven't already been over there today, you can head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day. We will be chatting with you throughout the game in real time. So we look forward to seeing you over there in just a little bit.
And if you want even more Eagles insight, please check out my podcast, Uncovering the Birds, where I take you behind the scenes each week with exclusive reporting, interviews, and everything you might have missed about the birds. You can listen to Uncovering the Birds at inquire.com/podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Once again, that is all for today, everyone. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time.